Hi folks, Steve here and welcome to the third and final instalment of my Grimdark Diorama diary. So let's crack on. Now, I'd mentioned in the previous video that I have been having some camera issues, and I've since got a new camera that I'm learning to use and I've got some really nice footage off that. But this last video is really going to focus on two parts of the build that I did. The first part is going to be creating Venus to go in the centre, the little kit bash that I did for that, and then the second part is going to be right at the end, putting it all together and the resin portrait that I did. So hopefully you'll enjoy that and it'll be interesting for you to watch. And so here you can see that I've taken a mix of green stuff and milliput. I like to combine the two, mix them together when I'm doing sculpting, as they've both got properties that are useful, and combining them together allows you to take advantage of both of them. So what I'm going to do is put on small pieces at a time and use them to sculpt the horrible little details that I want, starting on the side of the face and the upper shoulder. The way I'm going to do this, I've got a couple of different tools that you can see I'm using, and so I'll always start off with the harder tools, the more solid ones. So the little metal doodad, whatever you call it, use that first to manoeuvre the green stuff milliput mix around, get it to the places that I want, and then I'm going to swap over to the colour shaper, which is it looks like a paintbrush but it's got like a rubber head on it, and use that to do the sculpting itself, to actually create the shapes and dimensions that I want, because that's softer and it allows you more control over how you move the resin mix. And then I would go in with a paintbrush, slightly damp, and use that to actually smooth the mix out. So that's where you can get rid of little things like your fingerprint marks and stuff like that, and get a nice smooth finish on it. And really, when it comes to sculpting any kind of detail, it's just a case of taking your time, and you'll probably need to go back and forth between the tools as well. So you might need to spread it out a little bit more, going back to one of the metal pokers, let's call it for a better word, going back to your colour shaper to get those details in a little bit better, a bit more pronounced, and then finally going back to your little dampened paintbrush just to smooth it all and make sure that the actual joins between the putty and the model itself don't look too pronounced and obvious. And as I go along doing this, I'm adding the additional bits, the limbs, the branches, the wing. For these I just use super glue because I'm attaching it to resin, so polycement won't really work, and super glue just gives it a really quick bond, and I'm very impatient when I'm doing things like this. And I've got my blob of putty, my green stuff mix on the side, so I can keep taking little bits more as I'm going along. And I'm going to use this to help cover the joins, and so just to make them merge more seamlessly together. And so I'll work little bits of that on as I'm going along as well, and continue my process of getting the colour shaper in and the brush in and doing all that. And you can also see I've got that little tin of Vaseline at the side as well, and I use Vaseline to make sure that the putty mix doesn't stick to my fingers. You can also dip your tools into it as well, just to make sure that nothing clings to that whilst you're working at it, because you don't want to be pulling the putty off whilst you're trying to sculpt it. And as I'm going along attaching the limbs and adding the putty, things like that, you'll also notice that some of the larger gaps, like for example where the wings and the larger arm are on the back of the model, I'll be filling that in with some super glue and coconut fibre as well, because that gives a really nice texture of it can look like dirt, or it can just look like horrible growths and mould and things like that. So I like to use that for gap filling as well. I also wanted to make sure that I got the model attached to the shell before I did too much extra work, so I'd know what the final position was, and that way anything that I was adding to the model wasn't going to get into the way of how it was going to connect to the shell. Again, that would be super glued in, and I would use coconut fibre to fill out the gaps underneath, make sure there was something solid between the shell itself and the model. And again, it just looks like some nice rough, gungy, horrible matter in the bottom of the shell that she stood on, which fits with the aesthetic quite nicely, I think. Okay, so I mentioned the issues that I had with my camera, so that was about the end of the footage I had. The painting of Venus really didn't work out. It was very out of focus. It was pretty much unusable, so there's no point showing you that. So really at this point I was beginning to attach the models, the finished painted miniatures to the scene. For this I chose just to use super glue, just because it's just so much easier. It just gets a nice quick bond. And I didn't want to be messing about too much. I did originally try using a bit of hot glue, which I think you might see at some point here when I was attaching Venus to the centre point, but in the end I ended up taking that out and putting super glue in the place because it just wasn't steady enough. She was rocking and moving about whilst I was trying to get the resin in around her, which again is another point. I probably should have put the resin in first before gluing her down, but you live and learn about these things, so if I ever do something like that again, I know what order I'm going to do things in. So yeah, I think you can just see that I'm adding the supporting cast of characters. We've got the homunculus, if I'm saying that right, the sort of horse with the snail shell up on the right hand side, kind of hovering there doing his own thing, and the two cultists up to the left. For the backdrop behind the windows, I blue tacked down some granny grating to some black craft card and then sprayed over this with my airbrush to hopefully create a nice lattice effect. I started by spraying white paint down to create a base layer that the colour can show through, and then used a mix of greens, yellows and oranges to build up colours. I wanted the greens to be focused on the left hand side, moving more into the orange towards the right hand side, so it would contrast with those same colours that would be there on the actual miniature itself, on the diorama itself. I attached it to the back of the diorama once it was done. To be honest, this was my least favourite part. I wasn't really keen on how it turned out, so I may change it in future. With that done, I wanted to just touch up a few of the places where I'd done the resin earlier, so I was just adding little bits more in using a coffee stirrer just to get it to places that I wanted it on the terrain. So with that finished, and once it was dried, the diorama was done, so there's nothing left to do really other than show you some pictures. I really hope you've enjoyed watching me do this. I know there's been a few issues with the recording, but hopefully it gives you a good idea of what went into building this, all from that inspiration of the painting of the birth of Venus, and this is what I arrived at. I'm really happy with the overall finish that I managed to get on it. There's a few bits and pieces that I would change if I did it again, but that's all part of the learning process. If you did enjoy this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to my channel, that way you won't miss any other weird and wonderful things I do. That's all for now, so thanks very much for watching and goodbye for now.